You're listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are chatting with soloist, chamber musician, recording artist, and teacher Colin Carr. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Colin is in Bellingham performing the Haydn C Major Cello Concerto with the Whatcom Symphony Orchestra. I've recently been talking with a lot of cellists, and it sounds like there's a really interesting story behind that concerto and how it was found again. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's unusual because Haydn, of course, was living in the 18th century. He was born in 1732, and this piece was only discovered in the 1960s in the dusty basement of a Czech library.
That's incredible.
I think there was some doubt about its authenticity, whether it was indeed written by Haydn, but I'm sure it is because it's so full of Haydn-esque fun.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And who premiered it?
I think it was Milos Sadlo, who was a Czech cellist, and he was the first to get his hands on it. But now everybody has played it, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I feel like coming in later after the 60s, you would never know that it wasn't part of the repertoire.
No one even gives that a thought anymore. It just seems like it's been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was reading that you started playing cello when you were 5. How did you get your hands on that instrument?
Well, I had a mother. That was the story. I didn't know the front end of a cello from the back,
Yep.
And my one and only interest and passion at that time was football, well, what you call soccer. Born in Liverpool, and Liverpool is a soccer-crazy city.
Yes.
And I'm still madly obsessed with the game and follow Liverpool everywhere and watch all their games.
That's amazing.
But my mother played oboe, actually, and rather well. And there were 3 boys. I'm the middle boy of 3. We all played something, a pianist, a violinist, and a cellist. But the other 2 dropped their instruments, and I, unfortunately, became my mother's victim.
Charged ahead.
And I wasn't that interested in it, to be honest, for several years. At the age of 8, they shipped me off to the Menuhin school, which was a special music school in England, boarding. So it's very young to be
Very young.
torn from the family.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. I feel like here we hear about the school, but it's not necessarily, I think, as popular or not so much knowledge about the fact that it was boarding.
Well, it's a wonderful school. It's tiny, at least in those days it was tiny. It's grown since then. But in the whole school when I was there were 34 kids.
Wow.
And over a big age range as well. So the age range was roughly 7 to 17. So there were only 3 or 4 kids of your own age
Right.
At any given time. But it didn't matter. It was in a beautiful part of England, very rural, very quiet. Fields, woods, trees, a river. We had animals that we were encouraged to fratern with and look after and feed and pet, and all very new to me, coming from Liverpool.
Yeah.
Concrete and derelict buildings and
Right.
wasteland and
Different from a pastoral setting.
yeah. And but the school became my family, and because it was so small and everybody was there for the same reason, which was music, and so we had shared passions and made very, very close friends. And it actually became more like home than home.
Right.
I used to look forward to the ends of my vacations
To get back to with all of your new family, your musical family.
Right.
And such magic happens when you spend so much time with people and you play with them so much.
Yeah, exactly. So at the age of 8, when I started there, I still wasn't that sure why I was there. And it was probably took another 3 or 4 years to feel, oh, this is really fun. This is really interesting. This is what I want to spend my life doing.
It's incredible. And is it strings and piano?
That's right.
Okay. So lots of chamber groups,
Yeah.
small orchestras.
Yeah, we had a little string orchestra, and as you say, lots of small ensembles, trios, quartets, quintets. We would tour chamber groups. We came to the States twice, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So even at that age, before age 16, which was when I left school, I'd seen quite a lot of the world already.
That's incredible. And it's such a young age, like you were saying. Do they, or at the time, did they set up your day so that music kind of permeated through the day?
That's right. Well, roughly half the day was music, but it wasn't sort of the morning music and the afternoon other things. It was an hour of this and then an hour of that. And I think it was very well thought out. They were long days because there was so much music, but they also felt it was important to have a proper academic education as well, which
Right.
I was grateful for. And of course, Yehudi Menuhin himself, who was such a wonderful mentor for me, and he had so many interests outside of music, one of which was yoga, actually, and he had us all getting up at 6 a.m. to do yoga. Of course, I didn't
Wow.
think much of that at the time, but now I'm doing quite a lot of yoga.
Absolutely. And now it's
yeah,
part of the
right,
experience.
yeah.
But then it was so fresh.
But he brought in so many wonderful people, and not, of course, musicians, but many non-musicians whose thinking and whose passions he resonated with him and thought would be nice for us to see and hear. And that was also very enriching.
A very
as a kid.
well-rounded
Yeah.
musician, and basically taught you about your network by
Yes.
having you live and be
Right.
with a network. And then he welcomed his network in. And I heard you had an opportunity to play with him when you were 16?
Many opportunities. Well, at the age of 16, I played Brahms' double concerto with him, which, I mean, when I think back,
That's so incredible.
it's so outrageous. In fact, it was the first concert I ever did with a symphony orchestra.
Wow.
To be playing with someone of that, well, he's a musical legend, you know, and there was me
Absolutely.
as a little 16-year-old. I had no idea really no sense of the magnitude of the situation. Actually, I just did it and played it, and I wasn't even all that nervous. I just did it. It was a concert, and that was the first of hundreds and hundreds of concerts. I had many opportunities afterwards to play with him in chamber music, with some of his family, with Hefzibah, his sister, who was a wonderful pianist, and with Jeremy, his son, who was also a wonderful pianist. In fact, he had me play on a series in New York. There was a series called Great Performers at Lincoln Center, which took place in Avery Fisher Hall. And this enormous, cavernous hall, it was ridiculous. We played piano trios in there.
Wow.
Of course, they put him in there because he's Yehudi Menuhin, and he
Right.
fills the hall, 3,000 seats.
Wow.
We played, I can't remember, I think a Mozart trio and a Brahms trio. And he flew me over from England on Concorde.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an incredible
Yeah,
moment
yeah,
in
yeah,
time.
yeah.
What was that like?
Oh, it was amazing.
How many hours did it take?
3.5.
Incredible.
Yeah.
3.5 hours
Yeah.
from England to New York.
Yeah.
What was the experience of flying that plane like?
Well, it wasn't just the flying, it was the whole experience of arriving at the airport and being ushered into some special room with beautiful treats to eat and having your own special passageway to the plane. And then, I mean, that's what traveling should be like.
Absolutely. Then you think, well, I could do this more often.
And of course, the plane, which was really criticized for being so noisy.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, but inside, it was as smooth as a Rolls Royce. I mean, you didn't hear anything. You heard no engine noise at all.
Wow. And did he ride with you, or
No,
they just
no,
took
he was
you?
there. I had to do it. It was the only way I could get there because I was actually playing a concert in England, and I said to him, I don't think I can take the concert because I wouldn't get there in time. And he said, oh, we'll bring you over on Concord. And
That's an incredible story. What kind of a colleague or teacher was he? Was he a gentle soul, or was
Very.
he demanding?
very generous, very nurturing, and yeah, very, very caring. And he took an interest in all of us, actually. And he enjoyed talking to us about music. He loved playing with us. I mean, just the thought that somebody that illustrious would enjoy playing with children who didn't know anything. But he really did. And he had me come play concertos with him conducting, when he was also just extremely generous and supportive. He was not in any way dictatorial about the way music should be played. He listened to what I was doing as I was playing. He was flexible. He bent towards me when he felt he needed to. It was really wonderful.
That's beautiful.
But it was also, I mean, they were some of the most inspiring moments, because he could turn a phrase sometimes in a way that was just unique, and I would just have that feeling, yes, that's it. That's what I want to do.
Wow. It sounds like he was very magnetic on so many levels.
Yes, and he was also, of course, a great humanitarian, and quite opinionated about things that were happening in the world that he would either support or vocally not support. And he didn't pull punches like that. I mean, if he felt that a country or a government or a dictator were misbehaving, he would say so publicly.
Wow, which is...
Sometimes I thought he was quite lucky to be alive, actually.
I guess if you get yourself high up enough, people will notice if you're gone.
Right.
So at that time, you're surrounded by music. Did you have recordings that you loved, or musicians, maybe of other instruments or things that you always would fall back on?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think all of us musicians go through stages, I'm sure you did too, of loving something and then later on wondering quite why you were so obsessed with it. I went through a Wagner period where I was just so obsessed with Wagner opera, and I would lock myself in a room at home and listen to the entire Ring cycle before I came out. And
6 days later.
And I joined the UK Wagner Society, and I went to Bayreuth.
Wow.
I saw Parsifal and Tristan in Bayreuth at a very young age, probably about 18 or something like that. And those were also huge experiences for me. But now I haven't been to a Wagner opera or listened to Wagner for decades.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But it was informing that time.
Yeah. And I think I've had the usual musical gods, you know. I don't think there's not even a story there, really.
Yeah.
I mean, Beethoven and Brahms and Bach
absolutely.
and Schubert, and I mean, that's what I love to play.
Absolutely. Being in the school that you were in, it made your whole experience so unique. But was there a performance that you heard, especially younger, in those early years, that kind of grabbed you and helped tell you, yeah, that's it?
Well, they took us to concerts very often. We would go to London. We heard Rubinstein play recitals in London. Wow. We heard Horowitz play recitals. I mean, we were so lucky.
So lucky.
And I didn't realize quite how lucky we were, actually. So there were lots of experiences like that. Hearing Menuhin play Beethoven concerto, Brahms concerto, hearing Rostropovich play. A later experience, which was quite a lot later, when I was living in Boston, but it's a concert that really sticks out in my mind, was hearing Rostropovich playing Prokofiev Symphony Concertante with the Boston Symphony and Ozawa. And of course that piece was written for Rostropovich, and he championed it. And he and that piece were made for each other. And it was one of the most perfect performances that I've ever heard in my life.
That's incredible. Was that in the 80s?
That would have been, that would have been the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amazing. And when you have a composer like that who writes for you specifically, it's
incredible. I mean, he had something like 200 odd pieces written for him.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Definitely a leader in the community.
Yeah.
I would love to talk a little bit about your experiences with the competitions, because that's another whole aspect to that early time for you. Since you had already performed with Menuhin as a teenager, how did you kind of build your journey and energy as you were going into competitions and performance and mental practice. And he had taught you about the yoga. So there was so much background already going on. How did you approach competition?
Well, I'm very much, first of all, I should say, very much in two minds about competitions. And even then, I sort of saw them as a necessary evil. My years after I left the Menuhin school were quite unusual in that I left when I was 16. I didn't go on to college or university. I had no further education because somehow I had a career. And I thought, well, why not? If people want to hear me play and are willing to pay me to come and play, then I might as well, make hay while the sun shines.
Absolutely.
And in some ways, I regret that because I didn't have college years where I would have made different friends, and that whole university experience was lost on me. So yes, I had a career, but of course, like all musicians, we always want more. So we never feel we quite get what we deserve, do we? So I thought, okay, even though I have concerts and I had management already at that age, I thought I'll do some competitions. And yeah, I had some success. As far as preparing for them, I was never anybody I was never somebody that needed to be sort of kicked over the line. I had a pretty willful determination to do what I wanted to do, and to get what I want. It sounds awful, but
well, it's a huge piece of having the discipline to sit there and do it.
So I was very disciplined. I practiced always, very many hours, probably too many for a body, actually. And I didn't need concerts or competitions to practice. I just practiced because it's what I did and it's what I loved to do. But I was quite young. I think the first important competition was Young Concert Artists in New York, and that was in 1979. And when I succeeded with Young Concert Artists, that opened a new chapter in my life because it brought me to the States very often. I was still, of course, living in England at that time. And there were many concerts in small towns, little university towns. And it was very, very eye-opening they were different concerts than I'd ever done before, really. And seeing the whole of the United States. So I recently went to North and South Dakota, and they were the only two states that I had not been to. So I've now
all 50.
I've been to every state.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when you win one of the competitions, do they basically present you with a tour and
That's
say,
right.
we're taking you everywhere?
They would block off some time, and they were very good about filling that time with concerts. I think I came over 2 or 3 times a year, and they also gave me a New York recital debut at the Y, the 92nd Street Y. There were concerts with orchestra, there were concerts with piano, there were solo concerts, completely unaccompanied. And it's just a wonderful organization. And they also encouraged us to talk to audiences, which in those days didn't really happen. These days it's much more common, of course, and audiences almost expect it. And I think that musicians also realize that it's something that we need to do if we want to engage audiences.
A way to stay connected with the audience.
Yeah. So that was wonderful. And then they fixed me up with a U.S. commercial management, and so it went on from there, and there were concerts. And then soon after that, I did the Naumburg competition and won that, and that was also a wonderful thing for me in my career. That one of the prizes was to play with the Chicago Symphony. Wow. So I played Tchaikovsky Rococo Variations with them, and there was there were 2 further New York recitals at Alice Tully Hall through the Naumburg. So, yeah, those competitions were definitely a good...
They're a way to open more doors.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's all they can do. I mean, the competitions will never make a career, I don't think. But they, as you say, they open doors, and if you walk through them in the right way, which I didn't always do, then they can help a lot. I mean, I misbehaved pretty violently when I was young, and you know, I was quite obnoxious in the way that I thought things were due to me, and that somehow I thought the world owed me something, or that that I didn't have to do much to get it, and so I think I alienated people. I burnt bridges, and I have lots of regrets like that. That I wish I could relive certain situations and be a little bit more humble.
How do you think the pressure cooker of those big competitions, how does that, does it help the mental concentration and kind of the mental game behind all of this? Or is it just a completely sterile single
I think it depends who you are, really. I mean, I've always had a steely focus when I'm playing. So I've never needed any further help with that kind of focus. So even when things have been going wrong in my life, I can sit behind the cello and somehow find some kind of salvation, refuge.
A real center in the storm.
Yeah. And people say sometimes during concerts, oh, did you hear that cell phone, say, or did you hear the thunder, or did you hear? And I say, what? No, I didn't hear a thing.
That's incredible. It's a gift. It's a gift. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to find a way to focus and not let all the weird thoughts get into their brain. So it is a gift, but it's incredible. And I feel like as a competition winner, there's a very special extra something that people have to be able to just keep going round after round.
I suppose. I mean, when I watch sports people competing,
absolutely,
it's the same thing, isn't it? I mean, the focus that they have and the training that they do to be at the very pinnacle of what they're doing. I mean, it's exactly the same. In fact, I mean, I cross over in that respect because I'm a runner, and a serious runner. I run every day, and I did a marathon some years ago and trained for it, and it was just a wonderful experience. But
absolutely.
The parallels between that and music are amazing.
Well, what about, like you were saying, practicing maybe too much sometimes? That's a journey unto itself with playing hours and hours, like sport. How do you stay from getting hurt? Or did you ever get hurt and have to find a way around it?
Yeah. Actually, in both areas I did, because I have this tendency to overdo.
Shocking.
Yeah. So already in my teens and 20s, I had a certain amount of pain that was cello related in my right arm. And I never really addressed it until much, much later. But it was definitely from playing too much. And I remember one of my friends early on saying after a concert that they thought, for better or worse, that I played that concert somehow out of sheer willpower. And I didn't take it as a great compliment, actually, because they weren't saying they loved the music, but they could see that there was a struggle going into it, and that I mean, it's like a runner in a marathon after, say, 20 or 23 miles.
Exactly. You do have to will yourself to
get through the last 3 to 6 miles.
Absolutely.
And it's true. I did sometimes feel that way. And I wasn't serious enough at that time about eliminating physical tension. Since my teaching days, which of course came later, and seeing that kind of tension in students, that's what's actually made me realize that I need to work on myself.
Fascinating. I love that too. You don't notice it until you're saying it to try and help someone else, and then you look in the mirror.
Right.
And then you realize you can do it for yourself. So in all of that, that's all physical. I'm always really fascinated about people who concertize and travel and are all over the world. What about the adrenaline side of it? And how do you maintain the energy? And there's so much energy that you present when you are performing, and then you hop on a plane, fly somewhere else, do it again, rush, rush, rush. Did you ever find a happy medium? Do you go until you can't go anymore and take a break? Do you crash?
I drive myself. I've always done it, and I don't know what the consequences will be. I mean, I'm still here.
TBA.
Yeah. So, for instance, yesterday I was up at 4 a.m. and I went for a run, and then this was in New York. I was teaching as well. So I went to the university, this is Stony Brook, and practiced. And then I taught. So the teaching began at 9:30, but I had done 2 or 3 hours of practice before that, having run before that. And then the teaching ended, it was around 3, and I got on the train and went to JFK, and then I got on that flight to Seattle, 6 hours, and then rented the car and drove a couple of hours up here to Bellingham, and got in at 1:30 this morning.
Right, 4:30 for you.
4:30 for me, right. But I feel fine.
And I think that's one of the great mysteries of musicians, and I'm sure athletes are the same, but there's this seemingly endless amount of energy. Sometimes it will catch up with you, sometimes not, but everyone's like that. So it's very enabling when you're surrounded by a community of people working 24 hours a day.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I must say my body clock is not fully functioning at this point, because I do this commute from England, which is still my home, to New York twice a month.
Wow.
And so sleep is something that I just do when I can, really. I mean, I go to bed at a normal time, but I will never sleep through the night.
Right.
So I'll wake up 3 or 4 hours later, usually, and be up for a bit, and then go back to sleep. But the idea of an 8-hour night of sleep uninterrupted, that hasn't happened for a very, very long time.
Wow. You're at this point, any time is a good time.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer in napping. You can be just outrageously tired, nap for 15 minutes, and then be okay.
And be refreshed, just enough.
Yeah.
So how many students do you have at Stony Brook?
It's always between 10 and 12.
Wow. And then are you teaching in London as well still?
Well,
too?
I have a very nice situation in London, which is that I used to do a parallel job in London, but that became too much, really. So they were good enough at the Royal Academy of Music to just make a different kind of position for me. And I go in there 3 times each term. There are 3 terms a year, so just 9 times a year. And I'll do a 6-hour day, and the students can just sign up to play for me, but I don't have any of my own students.
Right, like a full-time studio.
So whoever comes to play for me has their own teacher already there, and they just come for me for it's like a little bit of icing on the cake, really.
Yeah, masterclass.
Yeah, I enjoy it very, very much. I see some of the same ones frequently, and so we do strike up a nice sort of teacher-student relationship.
Right.
But there are also a lot of new people coming through the door as well at the same time. And it's very nice not to have the full responsibility of seeing a student through.
Right.
It's just much easier to hear them for an hour, give them some advice, and then just go back to life.
Right. When you were full-time and you had a full studio there, how did you manage the concerts and the students?
Well,
I feel like
it was
backs
too
up
much.
quickly.
It was too much because there was the teaching in London, the teaching in the States, a full concert schedule as well. And in London, what they do is they ask the teachers to write reports on every student 3 times a year. So with 10 or 12 students there, that was a lot of writing, and it seemed to me completely unnecessary. I just don't know why they did that. And you're just writing the same things.
Right. Still
one
going
time.
strong.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But
maybe once a year.
Yes.
That's an enormous amount.
Yeah.
And lessons weekly.
Yes.
Or if you're missing double lessons.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's hard. It starts piling up.
Well, that's what I do, because it's twice a month in Stony Brook. I mean, I can't fly over from England every week. I probably should be living there, but I'm not, because we chose to live in England. But
right.
Twice a month does mean doubling up. So having 10 or 12 students means teaching 20 to 24 hours each visit.
And how long do you stay? 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, usually 4 days. I'm not one of these people that I just don't enjoy teaching from when I get out of bed until dinner time or beyond. Right. It's actually, I put a huge amount of energy into teaching, and I enjoy that. But for me, a 6-hour teaching day is the most that I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then practice.
Yeah, because there's all those other things. I mean, running takes time.
Right.
Yoga takes time. Practice takes time. And those things are the things which I feel nourish me like food. I mean, I actually really, at this point, don't feel I can live without them. So quite recently, I got shin splints. And it was one of the most painful things. And I went to see the doctor because I'd never had it before. And he said, you have to stop running.
No can do.
2 to 3 weeks.
Whoa.
Complete rest. So after about 4 or 5 days, I'm thinking, well, this is feeling a bit better.
Surely I'm fine.
Yeah. And off I went. And yeah, I could feel it. It hurt a little bit, but it was okay. But 2 to 3 weeks would have been impossible.
And you survived.
Yeah.
So that was plenty.
And now it's fine.
That's a good musician's mind to just make it happen.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about your instrument?
Sure.
Where did you find it? How did you get it?
Okay, it was in 1983. And I'd always had this idea that I wanted a cello made by this maker, Matteo Gafrilla. He was a Venetian maker. He was working at the end of the 1600s and into the 1700s. My cello's quite late. It was made about 1730. And in some ways, he's sort of the Stradivarius of cellos. I mean, even though Stradivarius did make cellos, he didn't make that many. And I mean, for a lot of us, Gafrilla is really the greatest cello maker that ever was. Gafrilla and Montagnana, the Venetian makers. And so I was in San Francisco. I was playing in a festival called Chamber Music West. And I got a message that there was a Gafrilla cello, beautiful Gafrilla cello, being sold privately in Chicago. And so I got on the plane.
Wow.
Next day, and went to meet the gentleman. His name was Carl Frew. He taught cello at Roosevelt University in Chicago. Wow. He was quite elderly. He wasn't playing anymore. And he liked me, and I liked him. And so I think he really wanted me to have his cello. Mm-hmm. And it didn't mean that it came cheap, but he was quite generous. He gave me we had a contract where I had 5 years to pay for it. And I had no idea how I was going to pay for it.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
I just knew I wanted this cello. And yeah, I probably, it was very dangerous what I did.
But sometimes you got to take a risk, especially if you love the instrument.
That's right. So that same year, I took the teaching position at New England Conservatory.
Aha.
Because that seemed like something
very responsible,
solid and secure. I was 25 years old then.
Wow.
And I had done some teaching, but I mean, again, it was pretty outrageous to get a
very
job
young.
there at that school.
You were pretty much the same age as the students there.
Exactly, yeah. So that was very interesting for me, and I don't think I was a great teacher, but over the years I learned on the job, and I still am. But these days I feel very comfortable teaching, and I know I can identify issues with people. I can help. I feel I can help anybody, actually, but and I love doing it. In those days, there were certain frustrations because I didn't sometimes know how to help somebody. I have to admit that. And there was also far too much of, oh, well, play it like this.
Right. Let me demonstrate.
Yeah. And the student would sort of look and say, oh, yeah, right, how? And then, well, I'll play it again. You know?
Absolutely.
But the cello did end up being paid for. And, of course, from a financial point of view, it was the best financial decision I ever made, because now it's priceless.
Greatly.
But it is still the cello that I love and have now had for 36 years. It's interesting because I'm not sure how long ago this was, maybe more than 10 years, but around 10 years ago, say, through the Royal Academy in London, they owned a Stradivarius cello called the Marquis de Courberon. And that was the cello that Zara Nelsova played on for almost all of her career.
Wow.
And it had been bequeathed to the Royal Academy, but with the condition that Zara would have it for her life.
Right.
And then when Zara sadly passed away, cello went back to the Royal Academy, and I had the opportunity to play on it. And of course, starry-eyed me, Strad cello. Wow!
Yeah, here
finally,
it comes.
This is it. We're going to, I'm going to be unfaithful to my Gufrilla, and I'm going to marry the Strad.
The beautiful lady.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I started this relationship with the Strad, played concerts on it. It didn't feel quite right, but it had a beautiful sound. It really did have a very beautiful sound. But I felt that it was only one very beautiful sound. It didn't have the color and personality character of the Gufrilla. And my wife, Caroline, she never really loved it either. I mean, she said it's not you. But for 2 years, I tried to make this thing work. And I was getting more and more unhappy. And eventually, I just had to admit, this isn't right. This is not working for me.
Interesting.
Went back to the Gufrilla and heaved a huge sigh of relief. But what an idiot. Why did it take that long?
Because you wanted to conquer it. Yeah, and there's something in that. You want that it can't be unplayable.
Right.
You've got to be able to make it work.
Right.
But the color, the personality, it's not quite it.
Yeah.
Do you know the gentleman who you purchased it from? Do you know where he got it? Do you know the family history of the instrument?
Well, the Gufrilla, it doesn't. It doesn't go back that far.
Interesting.
There were one or two papers and letters from maybe one previous owner, but it doesn't have the lineage of, say, some of the really important Stradivarius cellos, which we know going almost all the way back.
Right.
But of course, that far back, they weren't that valuable.
Right.
So
they were just an instrument.
People didn't bother writing up this stuff because there was nothing to write about.
I'm always fascinated, too, how they get into different people's hands or when they're found.
Yeah. Well, and of course, nowadays, how a young player
is supposed to get a good instrument.
It's just so hard. I mean, it was hard then, but now it's just impossible. I mean, there are foundations springing up and there are consortiums springing up who will make investments. And for financial gain, they'll then allow a young musician to play on instruments, and that's the only way it's going to happen. Banks are getting involved, and business people are getting involved.
Are there any patron experiences anymore where someone has an instrument and they want you to play it, or is that kind of old now?
I've not seen it either, certainly not for me, and not for my students, not for... I mean, there have been one or two lucky people who've had that sort of experience. But the thing is now that the money and the value of these instruments is just so off the charts that anybody who actually owns one of these instruments, he's taking a big risk by
letting someone use it,
play it.
Do any of these instruments, if they've been played for a long time and then they sit for 10 years, 15 years, does it do anything to the instrument, or can you play them back in?
Instruments do need to be played, for sure. There is something about the constant vibration that keeps them alive. And there is this Stradivarius violin you may know about in Oxford, actually, quite close to where I live, at the Ashmolean Museum. And it's this Stradivarius named the Messiah. And it's unique because it looks like a modern instrument. It's never been played. Wow. Well, when I say never been played, it's never been bashed around. It looks brand new.
Wow, I've never heard of that.
Yeah. And they don't let people play it, but every now and then, if some luminary comes along, like Menuhin or Isaac Stern, they'll get it out of the glass case and let them play on it. But the word is that it actually doesn't sound that good.
Right, because it's never vibrated. No. It hasn't had a chance to grow a voice. Right. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I would love to talk for a second about your chamber music trio and your experiences playing all over the world. I'm really fascinated to hear about people, especially when you've had so many concerts, if there has been something that just kind of grabbed you, where you remember the moment, you remember the experience or the piece, or something that was really special, and just kind of had that extra magic.
Yeah, I've had so many chamber music experiences. I mean, the trio... we were together for 20 years, and we did a lot of performing. It wasn't always easy. I think I wish we had got along better personally and loved each other more than we did. I mean, as happens a lot, there are a lot of string quartets who sound like they have perfect marriages when you hear them on stage, but then they get off stage and they won't see or talk to each other until the next time they rehearse or play a concert. So, and my trio felt a little bit like that. We would get together, we'd rehearse, we'd play concerts. I think we were a good ensemble, and people really enjoyed listening to us. But sometimes, that wasn't my happiest chamber music experience. It's funny because that was my group, but
not necessarily
it wasn't the one that I felt had the most magic. Yeah, over the years there've been many wonderful things. It's funny. I'm struggling to just pick one out actually, because there've been so many. I mean, there are favorite pieces, of course. So Mozart Divertimento for string trio, which is one of the most difficult pieces to bring off in the entire chamber music repertoire. But I went to this festival that David Finkel directs called Music at Menlo, and played this Mozart string trio with Arno Sussman and Paul Newbar. And we were given something like 6 rehearsals because which is a lot actually for in a summer festival. But we sat down and played, and it just felt so good that, I mean, normally a piece like that, even with 6 rehearsals, you just feel that it wasn't enough.
Right.
It's so hard. It's such a perfect piece that you never get close to that kind of perfection. But we sat down, and the first rehearsal, it just felt great. And we used the rehearsals, and in the end, we recorded it. And I heard some of that recently, and the same feeling came back to me listening to it as well, which sometimes it doesn't years later,
Yeah.
But I thought, this sounds really beautiful.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, that kind of joy. It's interesting that you recognize it still 20 years later or something, hearing the performance, and you that recreates the feeling that you had when you were doing it.
Exactly, and I feel like there's a little bit of a journey looking for that feeling. You sit down, you try and get invested in the experience, but then usually it just comes like magic. Yeah. You sit down with people and it just clicks.
And sometimes it surprises you. I actually wasn't expecting it in that situation.
Right.
Partly because I'd had an experience with one of those guys before that wasn't that great. And so I was a little nervous going in there, thinking that there might be some little bit of bristling,
Right.
But nothing.
But not.
No.
Do you enjoy summer festivals? Is that
Very
a
much.
fun time for you?
Yeah, because they're always in beautiful places.
Yeah.
And it's like the teaching at the academy. You go there, you play with people, and you don't have to live with them for very long.
Right.
And if you have a happy experience, then great, wonderful. If you don't, it doesn't matter, because you're in a beautiful place. It's never going to be a disaster.
Right.
But you can just forget about it and move on. And usually, if it's an enlightened administration director, then they've made sure that the food is good, and you're in some comfortable accommodation, and
all the fun of the extras.
And you're with colleagues that we meet the same people all the time, and bump into them at different festivals, and it's nice to spend the time with people.
The connection of that small world. Yeah. Is there certain places that you look forward to going because you just love where you are? Is there anything
Over the
like
years,
that?
there've been places that I've been loyal to for many years. So I used to go to Spoleto, Italy, to that festival every year for the noon chamber music concerts. And I loved going there. This little hill town in Italy that was just so beautiful. And then for many years I went to Santa Fe, same thing, just beautiful part of the country.
Yeah. It's a great respite from the regular grind of the year.
More recently, I was going to Banff for many years. I mean, all these places that I remember being loyal to, and those places being loyal to me, they were all geographically just beautiful parts of the world.
Absolutely. For my last question, I'd love for you to put your teacher hat on. Now that you have taught in both countries over several decades, the community is changing, the industry is changing. What kinds of things do you try and bestow on your students, encouraging them as they go out into the community?
It's an interesting question. Students are looking more and more for not just for a musical education, but for career development, and that's very hard. I mean, I don't provide enough of that, I don't think, as a teacher, because, I mean, I think that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for career development. I mean, it so depends on the individual. So I do talk to them as they're getting to the end of their tenure about things which excite them and things which I think they might do to grow. And but mostly what I'm teaching my students, I hope, is some kind of integrity. I think that's really what it is, because I feel that that's my musical strength, actually. And I think they see that also. And I see too much sort of cavalier music making, which I feel very often dishonors the great composers that we're dealing with. And I so often feel like performers actually rewrite music, and rarely for the better.
Right.
So I don't know how it is in your clarinet world, but in our little cello world, editors, I mean, cello editors have done so much damage. And I've tried really hard to repair some of that. Because once an edition is in circulation and it reaches hundreds, thousands
Exactly.
of young people who take it as some kind of gospel. I mean, it's in print, so it must be right.
Right.
And it's just so not true. And just going back to the score and really asking ourselves why a composer wrote this way, and then why did an editor change it to that way. And it's always recognizable as for a reason that is, to me, it shouldn't be a priority. Right. I mean, it's usually some kind of performing comfort, which, of course, we want to be comfortable when we're performing. We have to be. But if being comfortable means changing phrasing and rewriting bowing, sometimes even rewriting notes, I think that's crossing the line. And what usually happens in the cello, or in the string world rather, is that musicians, they want to take many, many more bows so that they can be louder. That there's a big premium on volume. And so to be loud, you take more bows and you break up the music. Big slurs of articulation just go down the tubes, they're broken up into 2 or 3.
To try and project.
Yeah. And so musical gesture is lost. And sometimes just the beauty and subtlety is lost, because everything always has to be out there. And so I really encourage my students to think about this and not to be resigned to not being able to do something that a composer has written because it's uncomfortable, but rather to really hone the technique and sharpen the tools so that we're able to really be humble in the face of this great music, and not then be limited by that, but actually still to think that, I mean, as an artist, there's still a huge amount of room to be creative,
right.
to be individual, to be unique, to have a personality. I'm certainly not in the least trying to get all of my students to do everything the same way.
Right.
In fact, my students don't sound like each other at all. The way that you can say, oh, that violinist is a Galamian or Delay student. You could very often tell that.
Right.
So I won't let that happen. But I think that's probably my horse that I ride.
The honesty of back to the score.
Yeah.
And I do think so many people just grab the edition and get going and do exactly what it says.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Very grateful. Thanks for listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Be sure to check the Inside the Notes Facebook page for details on our next guest.